The Savernake Forest Incident. Written by Daniel Walton. Narrated by Alan Walton. This is a true story that will chill you to the core. You've been warned, but I don't expect you to take any notice. You might be sorry. A true and frightening experience for a group of young lads and their boss, all postal workers, who decide they want to see if all the stories are true about supernatural events occurring in the magnificent Savernake Forest in Wiltshire, which is near to the historical town of Marlborough. So after work, one day they take a trip to the forest. The day had been boring, so this was just the thing to wake up the senses. For your information, Wiltshire has been known for hundreds of years to be the location of many supernatural events. From the spectral horse, which has terrified many poor souls in the forest, to several satanic lodges and the disappearance of many, and this attributed to human sacrifices, and to several small villages being infested with proven unpleasant psychic energies. Most notable of these are Chiseldon, Bishopstone and Shrivenham. Not to be left out in the local area is the mysterious and scary location, Silbury Hill and the Stone Circle. What you are about to hear is a true story which will chill you to the bone. This is your final warning. The story has been recounted to me by Dan, one of the 4 witnesses to this event, and is accurate in most part throughout. In some cases, the memory does slightly vary from the 4 individuals. You know, often in cases of severe and sudden shock, the memories of the event can become distorted over time, which is a natural and normal defense mechanism of the human brain. At some point in the future, I will invite all 4 individuals to undergo a hypnotic regression session and record the results so as to bring the results of this channel for your interest. Now, sit back and immerse yourself in the truly bone-chilling events of that cold November night. Events unfold. The true event concerns 4 guys who worked for the Royal Mail in the mail sort room. The job was boring, to say the least. The same repetitive things, day in and day out. 3 of them were quite young, in their early 20s. Dan, Simon and Dean. They were playing around and giggling about things that those of that age do. John, their boss, watched them from his small office opposite the mail sorting bays. His life was rather drab, and having these lads around sort of cut through the boredom of his probably unnecessary job. He would quite often wander over to them in pretext of checking progress. This particular time, though, he noticed they were sharing the local newspaper, engrossed in something really interesting. As they say, curiosity killed the cat. He joined them and asked them what was so interesting. Dean pointed at the headline and shoved the paper into John's hand. There was the headline: "Man found dead in Savernake Forest. Police appealing for witnesses. Foul play suspected." John scratched the back of his head and read on for a while. Quite disturbing news. He looked at them and asked what was so amusing about a story like that. They replied that this was a follow-up from truly awful events that had plagued this privately owned Wiltshire forest for hundreds of years. They all tried to speak at once, excitement writ large on their faces. Wouldn't it be a good idea to go to the forest late one night and maybe catch a glimpse of the headless woman riding a white stallion? Many people have seen this spectre, but they wanted to see for themselves. Over the years, there have been numerous sightings of this ghostly spectre from highly reliable folk that walked the forest Grand Avenue. These date back for hundreds of years. This new newspaper account intrigued the three lads, who collectively thought that it would be a great idea to go to the forest that evening and have a sort of a spooky adventure. There was no doubt that all three were bored and really fancied the idea of a completely different sort of evening. John, who had a rather plain sort of social life, became interested and asked if he could join them. He offered to take them in his pride and joy, a 6-litre Daimler, which they immediately accepted. He had to attend a Rotary International meeting in Swindon that evening, but could be free after 10 p.m. They all arranged to meet at the Royal Oak pub in Bishopstone, a small village on the outskirts of Swindon. John arrived at the pub about 10:10. He had a quick pint and they trundled outside into the cold night air. Simon and Dean poured into the back and Dan was in the front. He immediately noticed the myriad of illuminated dials that were housed in front of him. John pulled off down the windy lane that led in the direction of Marlborough, the Daimler effortlessly gliding up the inclines. This luxurious vehicle had the delightful leather odour that reeked of wealth and the best things in life. From time to time, and especially up inclines, he could not help showing off. John put his foot down a little on the accelerator pedal, and noiselessly the Daimler seemed to want to take off. There was the last small stump of a cigar, still slightly smouldering in the ashtray. Is that what Rotarians smoked? Dan thought of Winston Churchill. They were now on the Marlborough Road, and Dan was fascinated how the automatic gearbox changed, almost without a sound, into each necessary gear. John was raving about the technical aspects of the majestic vehicle as the speedometer showed 90 miles an hour. Dan was quite shocked, as it seemed they'd only been doing around 40 miles an hour. John looked at the fuel needle and pulled up at an approaching petrol station. Better to be safe than sorry. He did have a reserve tank, but he had a little thing about keeping the main tank full. Dan thought perhaps a little OCD, but kept quiet. After a few miles they were close to the forest, and they realized they were in the Grand Avenue itself. They pulled over into a small clearing, and John killed the engine, but left the headlights on. In the distance they could see silvery reflections looking back at them. They jumped. Then John realized they were looking at distant road signs, illumined by the Daimler's powerful headlights. They all lit up cigarettes, opening windows as the smoke wafted up into the damp forest air. The act of sharing cigarettes helped relax them, and for a while they chatted about all the things that young lads do chat about: cars, women, money, and the like. Simon's face lit up. He had a great idea. Just then, looking at nothing in particular, save for the waning moon, he blurted out that wouldn't it be a great idea to really spook some motorists and any folk wandering out there to believe that there really were supernatural forces wandering the forest. John unexpectedly came up with a great idea. In the boot of the Daimler was an old orange post office tunic. It had bold reflective stripes on the orange back, and they could cut off strips and fashion them into whatever they could think of. John had a knife and knew what he wanted to do. Out of the boot he retrieved a greasy jacket and a small plastic bag of accoutrements, the contents not revealed. Even with the door only open for a few seconds, the car became cold, very cold. John restarted the engine and turned on the car's marvellous fan heater. They were soon ensconced in the warm air. John asked Dan to open the glove compartment and to pass him his Swiss Army knife. He had now become fixated with an extension of Simon's idea. He advised that perhaps the best way to really spook people would be to cut the reflective backing strip into small eye shapes that would give the impression of creatures in the undergrowth, and any headlight would pick these out. For the first time that evening he smiled. He knew it was silly, but sometimes silly things can bring other things. Sometimes the smallest alteration in action or behaviour can bring about the smallest of alterations in the universe itself. As you know, everything is connected. John asked Dan to take out of the bag a tube of adhesive, which he duly did, and put it in his jacket pocket. He also asked Dan to retrieve the map book, which he placed on his lap, and began to start cutting small pieces of the stripes into approximately eye shapes. They all took turns in cutting out the eye shapes, until they were satisfied they had enough for the task in hand. The first location they decided on was the entrance to the parking clearing, and Dan and Dean started to stick these to the bark of trees. Anyone coming round the corner and into the clearing would be terrified at the sight presented. They all smiled, thinking of their planned mischief. No cars came, so they decided to get out of the car, leaving the headlights on, and wandered into the brush and onwards into the dense trees, and sticking 2 eyes close to each tree, with the adhesive that they had all shared. John and Simon paced back so they could get an idea of how frightening the silver eyes were. They yelled out in delight as they marvelled how scary the eyes looked, bathed in the headlights. They decided to use all the eyes, and in a frenzy of reflective post office material and adhesive, finished the job. It all looked so awesome. For a moment the air felt heavy, as there was a loud crash through the trees about 20 yards from them. They froze. They could not move. Then came worse. The loud squeal like an angry pig filled the silence with aggression. Their fevered brains calculated that it was the sound of a skinwalker from all the horror stories they had heard. The sound grew closer, and then they made a run for the Daimler and, hopefully, safety. They could not look around as they ran faster than they'd ever run in their lives before. One mistake on the uneven ground, and whatever it was would catch them. They broke out into the long grass, jumping over the roots of trees and bracken. John and Simon were startled when the other 2 jumped into the back, screaming, "Drive! Drive! Drive! For fuck's sake, drive!" John, in a rather cloudy moment for him, started up the Daimler and reversed back at great speed, just missing a gnarled oak that incursed into the entrance. Simon looked back briefly to see that the lads were truly afraid and in shock. They were very core chilled to nothing. A cloud of dust surrounded the Daimler as it stopped, and the smell of burnt rubber could be felt. Not the best smell in the world. John selected drive and floored the accelerator. He took a cursory glance in his rear mirror and looked again as he tried to keep the car straight. Such was the velocity engaged. A dark shape, darker than the night, was bounding along behind them and seemed to be gaining on them. The two in the back simply could not look around. Such was their shock. Something was really wrong as Dan focused on the fuel gauge, showing an empty tank. He screamed out to John to switch to the reserve tank. John did, and the reserve tank supply should have started, but the empty tank light still stayed on. This didn't make any sense as they completely filled up at the garage on the way here. Perhaps there was a leak. Maybe. Then there was a loud thump at the back of the car. John could see that something was hanging on to the back, and two menacing silvery eyes could be seen. John swung the car from side to side in an attempt to dislodge it, but whatever it was hanging on tight. John's heart started to race, and he was feeling rather nauseous as he hung on tight to the steering wheel. In the full headlights, the first of several speed bumps came at them at breakneck speed. John managed to blurt out to hold on tight, as this would be quite an impact. The front wheels hit the ramp with such force that the front of the car slightly lifted off the ground, did something else, and the back crashed down with a metallic, unpleasant scraping sound. Such was the force of the impact that whatever was hanging on to the back was dislodged, and John, in his rearview mirror, could see something tumbling away behind them, rolling over and over again. He felt just a little bit safer now that the thing had gone. He started to slow down as the next ramp approached. They all started breathing normally again. None of them had any idea about what they had just encountered. They all agreed that they just wanted to go home. The only problem was that they were almost out of fuel. John thought he just wanted to get to the top of the hill ahead, and then, if the engine cut out, they could roll down the hill in neutral as far as possible and then run for it. He also saw a lorry hit it head on, and fragments of whatever it was rained down like black snow. They felt the fear that nestled inside of them slowly lift as they made their way back to where people were. The Daimler purred back home, save for the scraping sound coming from the back, which sounded like parts of the exhaust pipe connecting with the road, and a clue about the suspension as the car was rather tilting to the left. They did not speak, and each of them made their individual ways home. They never spoke about it for any length after that fateful night, as it felt like they had met the devil himself. How they got out of that accursed place was a miracle indeed. Whatever it was certainly wanted them dead. It was only after Dan coming forward after all these years that this true story could be told. As I mentioned in the beginning, we will bring the others to this channel, and they will recount their own version of that terrifying night under hypnotic regression, and certified, of course, by an accredited hypnotherapist here in England. Before I forget, there's one more little thing. If you drive down Grand Avenue at night, you will probably see the silvery eyes through the trees. I don't believe they've all been taken down. But don't stop in the clearing. Don't. Not infrequently, the spectre of the headless lady riding her white stallion can be seen in various parts of the forest. Nobody, but nobody on their own, would dare to go there at night, alone.